What's up, fuckers? It's your boy. Breaking noses like Kyotaro, striking poses like Jotaro, Jack Slack, and it's the Fights Gone By podcast. Coming at you after Figueredo versus Benavidez, which was an interesting card. I won't say good. I mean, the main event was good while it lasted, but we'll get into that later. And ahead of UFC 248, which has come to save us from just a dire quarter of matchmaking, to be honest. You know, it's not magic. You can look at these. I look at these cards every week and I go, they're not pulling out all the stops here. These matchmakers, they're not sending their best. They're sending like heavyweights. They're sending women's featherweights, and some I assume are good people. But you can just go, oh my god, what is going on here? And then you look at UFC 248 and you say, well, this is a good card. You know, I can see all these matches. They have great potential to be interesting. Well, they're interesting already by who's in them and who's against who, and they have great potential to be interesting because of the matchups. And then the fight night after this is Lee versus Oliveira, and there's a load of good fights on that one too. So I'm hoping we're just like entering a portion of the year that the UFC cares about, because I don't know what was going on from the end of December until the end of February, but it was shite. But we'll talk about that fight card later. I want to lead with UFC 248. We're not going to bury the lead here. We're going to get straight into it. And I suppose we'll start where I did the most work this week, which was Weili Zhang or Weili Zhang, whatever the fuck you want to call her. I get my pronunciations from Dynasty Warriors games, so that's why I'm always correct. And Joanna Jędrzejczyk, or Jedrzejczyk, if you're being strict with it. But, you know, fair warning, if you haven't watched that already, go watch the Filthy Casuals guide. Might have overstretched myself a bit. I did one last week and I did one this week, and I left the one from last week up too long, and it was a specific matchup one. So the UFC media intern, who literally just searches for the fight, you know, so-and-so versus so-and-so, found it and immediately flagged it, which isn't great. But I'll just keep at it. I always win the counter complaint if I make one, but that takes like 6 weeks, and you're like, well, who wants to watch this now? The fight's already happened, it's over. Anyway, Weili Zhang versus Joanna Jędrzejczyk. I'm going to lead with the important bit, which is Weili Zhang is on she's a steaming hype train right now, just coming down the track, and almost nothing is known about her, and people, some weirdos got very offended by me saying this on my Filthy Casuals guide, but she is largely an unknown. She fought nobodies in China. You know, she was fighting, she fought a 2-0 lass in Korea when she was 13-1 and already the champion of Kunlun. She fought like a 4-4 fighter in her 14th fight or something like that. You look at these records, they don't match up, and yes, part of that is China. You know, there's not a huge heap of good MMA fighters for her to meet there, but she was already the Kunlun champion, and it came across like they just wanted to get her some stoppages and make it all look good. So she has this incredible finishing record outside of the UFC. Then she came to the UFC. She did finish Jessica Aguilar, which was a good stoppage, but Danielle Taylor and Tisha Torres got her into these long-range kickboxing bouts, and she couldn't really do anything about it. I mean, she won both the decisions, but they weren't like... If you watched those fights, you weren't going, wow, what a killer. You were going like, could have lost that decision, you know. And then she fought Jessica Andrade, and Jessica Andrade ran face first onto her. And, one thing we do know about Weili Zhang is that she is strong and big for the weight class, and she can hit decently. And where a lot of people have to... fight the smart way against Andrade and circle out and make her look silly, Zhang was able to hurt her off the bat, and the girl just ran her face onto Zhang's punches. None of that, I don't think, can be disagreed with, even though people tried. We don't really know what Zhang can do against a good, smart, savvy fighter of Joanna Jędrzejczyk's level. I mean, in fairness, there aren't a lot of those about in the women's strawweight division. But that's why this fight's so compelling, because, you know, if Zhang can pull it off here, that's really promising about her future. Meanwhile, Joanna, a lot of people think that she's lost a step. Maybe she has, but I don't think I'd blame the Valentina and Rose Namajunas fights on her losing a step. I think those were horrible matchups for her, because she does her best work when the other person's coming forward and trying to get their hands on her, and she does her worst work when the other person's like, I'm not really bothered, I might step in. And that was the Oh, you can't see me shoulder fainting at the microphone, but that was the entire Namajunas fight. Namajunas was like, am I stepping in? Nah, yeah, oh, and then she hit her with a left hook. Because if you faint at a counter striker, you get them swinging at air, and they either don't want to swing at air because they open themselves up, or because they look silly. And a lot of counter fighters, believe it or not, are cool people who think who don't like looking silly. So they start holding back a little bit, and then you can get the jump on them, especially if you're very quick closing the distance, as Namajunas was. A lot of people look at those fights and say, well, Namajunas trained with Valentina Shevchenko, so really she was just doing like Valentina light. And no, those fights were very different, and I would say that Rose Namajunas is much, much better on the lead than Valentina Shevchenko. What Valentina Shevchenko did in their fight, and this weirded people out because I actually heaped some praise on Valentina Shevchenko in the Filthy Casuals guide. Yes, sometimes I like to actually talk seriously. But what Valentina Shevchenko did was she parked up on the end of Jędrzejczyk's reach, and this is what she did with Holly Holm and countless other, just on the end of the reach, pull away the lead leg when they kick at it, or pull away the head when they strike at it, come back with counters. And they weren't great counters, she wasn't landing super clean all the time, but she was making sure that she was landing and Jędrzejczyk wasn't. So Jędrzejczyk would do her like step up low kick, and Valentina would pull her leg back and then throw like an almost upward kick into the back of Jędrzejczyk's kicking leg as she brought it back. And that doesn't do much, but it is scoring points while the opponent is not. And the other one that she did a lot in that fight, and you saw Paul Felder try it against Dan Hooker last weekend, or the weekend before, whatever, which is present the lead leg. Joanna Jędrzejczyk loves her step up left round kick to the opponent's lead leg if they're a southpaw, and when she did it, Valentina would use that as the trigger to spin into a counter, either the back kick, which she landed a couple of times, the wheel kick, which she's never landed except for against Caitlin Chikagian, but throws in every fight, and the spinning back fist, which you'll remember from the Holly Holm fight. It's a nice little setup because you've got it's a catch and pitch counter basically. If the opponent's touching you, they're close enough to hit, so you just have to spin and hit them before they get out of range again. We talked about Zhang and her long range kickboxing game, which is kind of unique in the UFC, at least, because it's a very Sander-influenced game. Sander, obviously... When did we start calling it Sander and stop calling it San Shao? Because when Kung Lee was about, everything was about San Shao. Hang on, just looking behind me, what is Kung Lee's book called? Yeah, San Shao. But Sander, if you've watched any of like the World Championships and stuff like that, it's always fun. They put up a highlight like every year of the Sander World Championships in Beijing or wherever. And it's basically takedowns, side kicks, and then kickboxing, but they do love the side kick. And one of the ways that you gel a side kick with a square on stance, you can fight side on like Stephen Thompson, but he only really does that effectively southpaw versus orthodox, or orthodox versus southpaw, open guard style stuff, where you can put that lead foot on line with the opponents. And you're not susceptible to the big rear leg kick into the back of the calf and back of the knee, back of the hamstring. But if you can use, the hard part of throwing a side kick from a more normal stance for MMA is that you have to get your hips and knees on a line so that they're pointing at the opponent. It's kind of like a back kick, the way to throw the back kick when Dennis Seaver was doing it, and the Crow, what's his name? Fucking hell, David Lasso. Those early guys, when they were doing it, it was you throw the jab and you step across yourself while you're jabbing. You're doing a very basic hiding of you changing your stance, but the opponent can often see that coming. You often see people like sneaking into a side-on stance. They'll extend the lead hand and wave it around a little bit, and that's the one where all the commentators go, he looks like he's trying to spin in a minute. Oh, there it is, and it never ever connects. But there's other smart ways of doing it too. Holly Holm, and I've also seen Michael Chandler do this, which is weird because Michael Chandler doesn't do anything smart for the most part. He's just a jab and a right hand, and a series of negotiations with Bellator every time his contract runs out, where he comes out and goes, I think I'm the worst stylistic matchup for Khabib, and then immediately re-signs for double the money with the Bellator the next day. But the way they do it is that if the opponent steps around their lead leg, particularly like orthodox versus southpaw, when they're trying to slide down the side, they line themselves up, and you can throw your side kick almost on like a not quite 45, maybe like 30-degree angle. The opponent lines themselves up, and you step your back foot up towards your lead foot, pull your lead leg up, and kick them in the gut with the side kick. And of course, that's a similar idea to along the fence where you can land the back kick as the person circles past your lead foot. It's shortening the path, and it's making it so that you don't have to do a step before you spin. The way that Weili Zhang throws her sidekick is off a missed inside low kick. So she point scores with the inside low kick. The opponent often steps back, because the stepping back is the standard defense in MMA. And then as they come in again, she sidekicks them from that like side-on position. It's clever, and it works really well. She did tons to Danielle Taylor. She did it to Tisha Torres, who's a much better kickboxer than Danielle Taylor. I really like it, and it's interesting, but like it is sort of her only thing at range. She does the occasional Superman jab thing into right low kick, but it's super spazzy. It's not like George St. Pierre slick. And she also throws this weird ass thing, and I talked about this in a Patreon piece a while back, when just before she won the title actually. But she does this weird thing where she lifts the lead leg as if to throw a kick, and then tries to jump in with an oblique kick with the rear leg, and it looks dope. It's straight up wushu. You know, you go, oh, nice. But it's never ever going to work. It's the same reason that when, we said, the one we always do is Lando Venata and Yair Rodriguez. Lando Venata has landed the low line sidekick into the wheel kick because he just places his foot on the opponent's knee. And then they, who was it? John McDacey was like, oh, fuck, and circled offline. And then he spun into a wheel kick with twice the speed. Whereas Yair Rodriguez tries to stamp on people's leg and then is surprised when they're not there for the follow-up. If you're threatening to do something and the opponent moves away, you're not going to then stamp on their lead leg, which is just to, jamming kicks work because they catch the opponent at the nearest point as they're trying to enter range. Which is why the oblique kick and the low line side kick work. As the opponent steps in, that's the first thing that comes through. Longest weapon, nearest target. It's also, as soon as they move away, that's gone. So as soon as you start showing feints, you're not going to feint and then follow up with an oblique kick. Unless the opponent's reaction to the feint is to like bury their head and put their gloves up and stand in place. So I'm sort of at a loss for ideas here because I've only seen Weili Zhang against scrubs and then in long-range kickboxing matches that look nothing like her Chinese fights in the UFC, with the exception of the Aguilar one. So I don't know. Does she want a long-range kickboxing fight against Joanna Jędrzejczyk? Because Joanna Jędrzejczyk has struggled with people that don't come to her. Does she go after Joanna Jędrzejczyk like she wants to put her weight on her and make her feel her punching power and stuff? Because I feel like that would play into Jędrzejczyk's best game, which is circling, jabbing, throwing slick low kicks and keeping moving. Also, lots of people rate Zhang very highly as a grappler, a good, strong lass in the clinch. It would say that, if you watch that Tisha Torres fight, they both take each other down and then get rolled over the top from side control at various points in the fight. It's a bit weird. So ultimately, I'm kind of at a loss in this one. I don't know if they have a weird long-range kickboxing battle and the weird side kick off the inside low kick stops Joanna Jędrzejczyk from landing any of her counters and ending them in low kicks and things. I don't know if Zhang runs her face onto Joanna Jędrzejczyk's jab over and over again for 25 minutes. It's very weird, but I'm weirded out by the takes that I've seen from people who are like, Joanna has 2 stoppages in the last X years. Zhang has stopped all but 2 of her opponents or whatever, and you ignore that the 2 opponents were the only ones who actually fought intelligently against her in the UFC. So I'll keep you posted, and we'll find out whether Zhang's the real deal or not. Let's talk main event. Did a piece on Unibet about this. You should probably go read it, but Adesanya versus Yoel Romero. Weird one. No one's really giving Yoel Romero the respect that he deserves. He's on a 1-3 slide, but 2 of those were 5-round wars against Robert Whittaker, which, Robert Whittaker put on the performance of a lifetime, maybe in MMA, like one of the best performances ever, or 2 of the best performances ever, and still got by on the skin of his teeth. And then the other one was against Borrachinha, and Borrachinha had nuked everyone and ended up fighting to survive by the end of the 3rd round. So I wouldn't write off Yoel as washed up or anything, but I think he's going to have a hard time here because of the skills that Israel Adesanya brings to the table. I think against Yoel Romero, I've always said you got to drive a high enough pace that he's actually working the entire time to reap the benefits of him having such an explosive style and relying on his physical attributes so much. So many guys are like, he'll get tired in the third round, and then you don't make him do anything for the first 2 rounds, and he's just sort of... If you watch any, I suppose people would call it prime Romero now, but if you watch any of those fights where he just murders dudes, nothing's happening except when he wants it to happen. He's just sort of bouncing around the cage, not throwing any strikes, and then he's flying knee through your head. He's brilliant at conserving his energy. And one of the things about Adesanya at his best is that he gets really active with his feints and keeps people working and guessing and panicking a little bit. However, against Anderson Silva, a very competent counter-striker, Israel Adesanya sort of took the foot off the gas a bit in the second round? And the third round, well, I think he picked it up again by the end of the third round. But, he got a little bit second-guessy of himself there. And, the Whittaker fight was super weird because you didn't really get to see what Adesanya normally does because he was so, Robert Whittaker wasn't taking a moment without rushing at him. And Adesanya was going, oh, okay, I'm just going to have to keep pulling my head back and then at some point I'll counter you. I was watching the Whittaker fight again the other day and two things that really stood out to me. Robert Whittaker was looking really fucking fast because he was able to get in with a lot of those bursting up the center jabs, that sort of karate burst stuff. And he'd score the jab, and then Izzy would be out of the way before he scored the right hand. And he was chasing with the right hand. And the couple of times he threw low kicks, he threw a couple of outside low kicks and one inside low kick, I think it was. But the times that he did that off his entry, he took Israel Adesanya out of his stance, because obviously Israel Adesanya is going to stretch his stance and leave his legs there to pull his head away and start retreating. Lead leg's the last thing that leaves range. Obviously, not in terms of jumping oblique kick, because you want their leg to be braced on the floor. But if it's just dangling as he retreats, you can normally kick that and turn the opponent around a bit. And I think if you did the rematch, that would be the one thing I'd be saying to Robert Whittaker: get him moving back, kick the legs, then try and take his head off with punches. But when you compare Adesanya and Borrachinha, Borrachinha, power monster. Walks people to the cage, kicks him in the body, follows up with punches. He's kind of like those cool bits of the Fedor Krokop fight where he'd throw the kick and cut Krokop off along the ropes and then come in with body shots and stuff. Paulo Costa is like that, but that's his whole game. And I was amazed how well Romero stood up to that in their fight. Not just taking the blows to the head, but to the body, and not really slowing down as badly as Costa did. Obviously, Costa's a big, juicy guy. So you'd expect him to get tired from throwing punches, but you wouldn't expect him to get tired from kicking the guy's abdomen faster than the guy got tired. Faster than the guy he's kicking, rather. And one of the things that really stood out was that Romero was operating a lot of catch and pitch, 52, if you will. He was operating a lot of catch and pitch in that fight, so he's covering up, doing the crazy monkey with high elbows, alternating along the fence, and then coming back with short left straights and things, almost from feet level. And he was catching Costa with those. And that's because Costa's there. He's applying the pressure. And this is something we always say, if you're applying pressure, you are giving up a bit of your defensive capabilities. You are using your presence, but equally the other guy can hit you. That's the bargain. You're applying pressure, moving him to where you want, forcing engagements, but you might get punched on the nose while you're doing it. In fact, more than likely you will at some point. I think the thing with Adesanya is that he's striking and then he's always considering what's coming back. And I think that's going to make it very hard for Yol to claw his way back into the fight like he did against Costa, where Costa would hit him with 5 good punches and then get caught in the head with a really good blow afterwards. I think that's going to be tricky to do against Adesanya. However, Adesanya is probably not going to pressure him to the fence in the same sort of way. Probably going to play out more out in the open. And I think that's also where people have trouble driving a pace on Romero, because you're out in the open, he can move and sort of glide off wherever he wants. Costa really put him against the fence, had his feet up under him. One thing that I ended my Unibet article on, and I don't normally say watch out for this one technique, because you're giving you're putting a lot of pressure on that then, and a fight can play out any number of ways. However, I did with the headbutt in the Figueredo Benavidez fight, but we'll get into that in a minute. The one I'm saying look out for in this one is Yoel Romero loves the low-line sidekick. He loves it so much that he broke Robert Whittaker's knee with it in the first fight in the opening seconds. And then Robert Whittaker spent the entire second fight trading them with him because he hated them so much. But the low-line sidekick, especially the way Romero does it, where you leap across the ring, and he sort of pairs it with a hook kick occasionally. But the way that he does that, Whittaker was trying that against Adesanya, and Adesanya was retracting the leg and throwing high kicks. And if you saw Holly Holm versus Nunes, knocked her out in exactly the same way. I think due to the setup of the stances, Adesanya was withdrawing the leg and kicking with the same leg high, but Nunes withdraws the lead leg and kicks with the rear leg. But whatever you're doing, if you're going into the open side with the kick, with the high kick on the return, you can really just murder the guy while he's either on one leg or trying to sneak out sideways. I think that could be a real problem for Romero in this fight, because he loves that side kick so much. It's like Zhang's inside low kick. It's his go-to out of range. He doesn't really have an extended boxing game at range, or even kickboxing game. It's the low line side kick, and that's about it. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Izzy pulls his leg back and tries to kick Romero's head off. If he succeeds, that'll be awesome, or certainly make a very good highlight reel. I think the interesting thing about this fight is that obviously Romero has all these wrestling accolades. I think I pointed out that he won his first world championship when Robert Whittaker was in primary school, and obviously Cyril Adesanya was also in primary school. So he's been wrestling forever, but really when you see him take people down, it's sort of reactive doubles. It's just when he feels he's got the opponent moving in, he'll hit a quick double, but he does it on a whim. And when he's struggling in fights, you don't really see him like push to the fence and grind much. It seems like the wrestling comes to him in his fights rather than the other way around. I would feel much more comfortable giving him more of a chance if I'd seen him like systematically drive people to the fence, and maybe not. I think he's got a pretty good completion percentage on his takedowns, because he just times them really well when guys are stepping in on him. But I would feel a lot more comfortable if I'd seen him fail a ton of takedowns, but just constantly grinding people on the fence. Should be a good fight either way. Obviously, a lot of people in the hardcore techie community rooting for Romero to finally win a belt. I mean, it would be a nice end to his career. I don't think his career is ever going to end. He's going to be fighting into his 50s. He said this week he wants to outdo Bernard Hopkins and fight when he's 50. Fucking hell is all I can say to that. Let's have a little rundown of the rest of this card, because I think it's a pretty solid bloody card. And you know how hard to impress I am. What we got? We got Giga Chikadze is on the prelims. He's always fun. Does a lot of striking and then from orthodox, stepping back into southpaw and then throwing the left kick to the lever from there. You got Rodolfo Vieira fighting Safarov. Safarov, I mean, he got submitted by Tyson Pedro. Who else did he lose to? Oh, Gian Vellante stopped him too. So, fragile guy, because Gian Vellante will go to decision with anyone. And it'll be boring when it happens. But Rodolfo Vieira had a bit of an odd one in his first fight. I'm not an odd one. It's just people expected him to just blow through the guy he met in his UFC debut, and it took him a little while. He had to take him down a few times. Was on top of him through most of the first round, but wasn't really able to control him all that well. Was out at range, like dealing with up kicks and trying to enter on guard passes. Second round gets him down, no hands pass. Hits him with I think it was an arm triangle to finish it. So, still very dangerous. But again, Rodolfo's game was never really no-gi to begin with. He was a gi legend. He used to grab the gi pants and just change sides, giving the Toreador pass. Absolute monster. And accomplished in no-gi, but he was very much a gi guy, is how I would have described him in his prime. But I would say he's probably going to submit Safarov easier than he did his last guy. You got Darren Wynn versus Gerald Meerschaert. Oh, Meerschaert versus Rodolfo would be fun. Gerald Meerschaert, who I've watched let people get him down and pass his guard, just so he can then get back to guard and start grappling with them. He's a very strange fighter, but very accomplished grappler, or in MMA at least. And Darren Wynn, obviously, I mean, the thing with Wynn is that he's very, very gifted and skilled, but he also has attributes that just make no sense. He's 5'6" at middleweight, and he's got a 70-inch reach, and you're going, what on earth? I mean, he's not going to get much lighter, because he's built like a trash can, but he's had some trouble making it work for him. He was swanging and banging in his last one against Darren Stewart and lost the split decision. Even against Eric Spicely, he was swanging and banging and ended up going to the decision. He's a guy who hits very hard, but doesn't seem to be able to translate that into finishes a lot of the time. But he's DC's protege, so hopefully he starts getting better towards his 40s like DC. Marco Madsen's fighting Austin Hubbard. I don't really remember much about Hubbard, but Madsen's first fight in the UFC, he just got to the fence, tried to take the guy down with a body lock, like sag throw, missed it, scrambled back up, took him down with double underhooks, get the knee inside, throw him to their hands. The classic, like, AKA throw off the fence. Took top position and just elbowed the guy to death. And it was solid. I mean, his nickname's the Olympian because he was at the Olympics. And you're like, it's not really a defining feature here. We've got a few Olympians in the UFC now. Tell you what is fun, though. We got Sean O'Malley back because it's been, we got 2 returns on this card where it's just been forever for drug use that I think, it kind of annoys people. I won't say inconsistency with USADA, but like the seeming inconsistency, like the way that they always find a way to let John off with less. The way that Nick Diaz ended up with a longer ban for marijuana than Anderson Silva did for using steroids in the same fight. Stuff like that. And with Neil Magny, who tested positive for a SARM, and they've since changed that, like recently. I mean, he's been off for the best part of 2 years now, I think. And just the other day, obviously, Nate Diaz got caught with a SARM, and they were like, it's no problem, we changed the rules. So Neil Magny kind of got fucked in that. And Sean O'Malley was having the pulsing thing, wasn't it? It was Osterine. I mean, he did cheat at some point, got caught cheating, but he was off forever because his results were never coming back clean, but they were always for the same thing that he'd already been caught with. I think that's the correct way, if I'm remembering that correctly, but he has been off forever, and they keep booking him for fights after the ban, and then they keep going, complications in blood work, but not giving him another ban. So I think that's, I think I'm probably 90% right with how I recall that. I mean, O'Malley's a really fun fighter, kind of in the Conor McGregor mould. Pressure the opponent to the fence, really fluster them with like head kicks and things like that worry people. The odd body kick and stuff. Throw the left straight if they're not going to do anything. But really, a lot of what he does is pressure people to the fence, wait, and as they step towards him to lash out because they're on the fence, they're under a lot of pressure. They step towards him to try and get off the fence and attack him, and he falls away, comes back with a left straight. He did it like half a dozen times to Andre Sigmatath. It was really lovely. It's what I call the distance trap. You park yourself up just beyond striking distance, but just close enough to put with the fence at the opponent's back where they're going, fuck, he could step in at any moment. And then you just pull away slightly and let the opponent fall onto you. I mean, the distance trap generally is just being on the end of someone's reach, like Valentina Shevchenko versus Joanna Jacek. Second positive statement about Valentina Shevchenko. She looks like an old Russian mother. There we go. We're back on even scale. I don't think they've matched him up against anyone special. Who is it? Jose Alberto Quinones. I think I've seen him fight before. Hold on. It's been a few months. Fuck it. Oh, yeah, he lost to Nathaniel Wood. I remember that. Oh, man, he's been in the UFC forever. Well, anyway, moving on. Alex Oliveira versus Max Griffin. That's nice. That's a good fight. I mean, Alex Oliveira, I think he's on a 4-fight slump at the moment, but he's going to be around forever because he's super interesting. In and out of the cage. Whether he's having a barn burner with Mike Perry or kidnapping his son on a motorcycle and evading the law only to fight on another card the next week. He's just a strange dude. And he cheats in every fight, but, he's an amazing heel. Just lost a fight with Nicholas Dalby. Okay, he's on a 3-fight losing streak, not a 4-fight one, sorry. But Max Griffin's kind of a guy who's I don't think he likes me, but he's always the kind of guy who's been on the cusp of breaking through. He does good things against old-timers like Thiago Alves, but then loses split decisions to them. Lost to Curtis Millender. But like the thing with Griffin is that he always looks technically good for long portions of the fight. He's got a really interesting sort of American kickboxing style. And his wrestling's pretty decent too. He just somehow ends up losing these decisions. Doesn't really get finished very much. Who's the last person to finish him? Fucking Colby back in 2016. So it's been a while. He's fought guys like Curtis Millender, very dangerous finisher. And Zaleski, another very dangerous finisher, and he's been through those too. So, I mean, I could see him outlasting Oliveira here, because Oliveira does tend to fade. And also, get himself into brawls. I feel like Max Griffin won't have a brawl if he can avoid having a brawl. He'll just fight a smart fight, whereas Oliveira will just dive face first into a brawl and then tire himself out doing so. But, it could be another one of those things where Oliveira, even though he's got a few losses on the trot, he's still like a top 20, 25 guy, whereas maybe Max Griffin isn't. Well, we'll see. And then Neil Magny versus Liang. No easy fight coming back for Neil Magny. Fucking hell. Liang. amazing performance against Zaleski a few months back. And I mean, that really just hammered home that the improvements in his boxing and footwork and stuff have been very real. They just knocked out, what was his name, Joanna, with a great sidekick. Fucking hell, that was the end of 2018. I feel like, yeah, he hasn't fought a lot recently, but he's a monster. Great pressure, great boxing, great footwork, very awkward, for the opponent at least, not like throwing his face out there, easy to counter awkward, but like awkward southpaw, tricky. And, a strong wrestler in his own right. He had a decent match. He did gouge Jake Matthews' eyes, but Jake Matthews is a very strong wrestler for that weight class, and Zhang Liang had a decent match with him. So, yeah, Magny might not be too big of a... I would say, fucking hell, Neil Magny's got a hard ask coming back from 2 years to that. And then you got Beneil Dariush versus Drakkar Klose. And Beneil Dariush was a top 10 guy for a little while, and then beat the snot out of Edson Barbosa for most of a fight and then ran onto a flying knee. And then he just sort of stopped being a top 10 guy and he's had to work his way back up. But he finished Drew Dober and then Frank Camacho, two halves of an awesome fight. And now he's got Drakkar Klose. So he's kind of going through like next rung down guys to get back into the top 10. And he's doing a great job of it. Drakkar Klose, I think he's on a 3-fight winning streak, fought Lando Venata a little while ago. Hasn't looked amazing. Complains a lot to the referee. But yeah, difficult enough guy, stiff in the clinch. Yeah, I think that'll be a good fun fight. I think I could see Dariush working the grappling on him again, and Dariush with the body kick too. That's just a nightmare. And Drakkar Klose had a lot of trouble with whichever of the tamers he fought when they were hitting him with the open side body kick. So not a bad card overall, I'd say. Quick recap of that absolutely disastrous main card from the weekend. You had 2 women's featherweight fights. You had Felicia Spencer fighting a girl who just lost to Megan Anderson in the co-main event, and she mauled her, naturally. And then you had Megan Anderson fighting some no-hoper in the opener of the main card or whatever. And then you had Magomed Ankalaev versus Ion Cutelaba. Awesome fight. That and the main event were the ones we were looking forward to. And Ankalaev managed to win, but in another way that's not going to help his hype train at all. I said last week, like, he has lost maybe 5 seconds of his fights in the cage, and the hype just disappeared because he got triangle choked by Paul Craig, even though he beat the snot out of Paul Craig for the rest of that fight, and hasn't lost since, and has stopped almost everyone. But Ion Cutelaba, acting like a dickhead as usual, they almost get into a fight before the fight starts, comes out, high kick from Ankalaev, doesn't seem to hit Cutelaba. Like, smashes into the forearm, but it didn't, like, hit his forearm into his head too badly either. Ion Cutelaba starts doing, like, the fake, whoa, wobbly head thing, throws some punches, does the fake wobbly head thing again. To my eye, it looked very clearly like he was being a dickhead. And then the referee jumps in and goes, stop! And it was one of the worst stoppages I've ever seen. But, as much as I felt robbed of that fight, it's also hilarious that it happened to Ion Cutelaba because he spends so much of his time mean mugging and like putting on a performance basically, and he's just not that level yet. He's just not done anything to back it up. I'm not going to give you points for losing to an ancient Glover Teixeira and then laying on Khalil Roundtree, who had just gone through like a spiritual rebirth and decided that Muay Thai was the answer to everything. And then in your main event, which I made a Filthy Casuals guide for, which they subsequently took down, but I also did a podcast on, and I said basically the same things. Joseph Benavidez and Davison Figueredo had a bit of a barn burner, actually. It was good fun. You got to see that scrambly bottom game from Benavidez. Figueredo took him down, I believe, which was super weird. But Benavidez immediately to his knees, starts scrambling. He ended up in a reverse single position somehow. You can get there by funk rolling, but you can also get there by doing like a star sweep from guard rather. Can't remember how he got there, but he did get there, which is where you've got like it's kind of like you're guillotining the opponent's leg, but from like a sprawl position. And the danger there is the crucifix and the reverse triangle. Figueredo immediately starts trying to get the reverse triangle. There's a scramble with an armbar attempt. Hitchhikes out of it. Fucking awesome. The grappling was great fun. The striking was Figueredo waiting for Benavidez to run in face first, as we pointed out he did in both the podcast and the Filthy Casuals guide, and timing him with right hands as he did so. And then the fight ended when Benavidez ran his head on, or his face onto Figueredo's face. It didn't look like Henry Cejudo was doing, where he was dropping his head, because you want to make sure the top of your head goes into the opponent's face, because that's going to hurt them more than you. It was like face on face. So I'm not going to blame Figueredo for the headbutt, but it clearly stunned Benavidez, and then a right hand followed and knocked him out. Hilarious, especially hilarious because, it's just, I was saying the entire time coming up to this, I was like, he leads with his face, he almost always throws his left hand and then shifts into a right hook. He doesn't, it's almost like he can't not shift. It's more effort to not shift because he throws his head so far forward. He doesn't really use a lot of ideas, and I think I said in the Filthy Casuals guide, he hasn't thrown 3 punches or 3 strikes from the same stance without shifting in a very long time. So when he fights people like Henry Cejudo, he runs onto their head. When he fights people like Sergio Pettis, he runs onto their counter right hands. And in this one against Figueredo, he did both, and it cost him the fight. And yet people were still like, I don't know, everyone seems to be like writing for someone now. I don't know why, but everyone's got a gig writing somewhere, and they all want to get into analysis duels. And you're like, what? No, I'm just telling you what I see, and then, that's how the fight ends. Bizarre. Really, my learning this week and last week was just a bizarre look into the subculture of people believing that you can be straight up better or worse at a single stat of like it's UFC undisputed or whatever. I think you'll find his striking offense is very high and his striking defense is very low, but his footwork would be above Alexander Gustafsson. You're like, well, he literally can't not shift with his punches, whereas Alexander Gustafsson can. That's a counter argument to that. You could bring your own counter argument, but clearly it's not as fine cut as like, I think you'll find. Very, very strange. Anyway, let's do a couple of questions and then get out of here for this week. Hey Jack, I hope everything's alright in the newly independent Great Britain. I have 2 questions for you. The first one is about Gene Tunney's A Man Must Fight, which I assume you are familiar with. I really enjoyed Jack Dempsey's championship fighting, and I am interested in Tunney's book for that reason, and then learned a copy goes for €400 at least. Fucking hell. Do you think it is worth that much money? Which is kind of big money for me. My second question is about your favourite fighters that never really made it in the big fights, but you still like for cool or entertaining fighting styles or interesting quirks. For example, for me, it would be Michael Johnson, who's been around for ages and always looks like he has the skill set to beat up anyone, but then kind of doesn't. And Dan Kelly, who made techniques you'd expect to see on a Sunday morning judo tournament work on the big stage. I would really appreciate your input on these topics. Best regards, Simon. Firstly, fucking hell, I didn't realise Gene Tunney's A Man Must Fight is going for €400, because I have a copy of it somewhere in here, and I'm not quite sure where. So I'm going to have to dig that out. Oh, nope, found it. It's not in great nick, though, so probably not going to get much money for that. My experience with that book was that it was an enjoyable read. It's great to get his account of his fight with Harry Greb, or his fights with Harry Greb, because obviously they weren't filmed, and the one he lost, his only loss, was to Harry Greb, and that was one of the most gruesome fights ever, supposedly. Like, Greb cuts him open, and the ring is just filled with blood. And I've talked about Greb before. People have asked me who was that guy you were talking about that there's no film of, but you would love to see. Harry Greb. He was the middleweight champion of the world, and he used to fight like every weekend, because when you're the middleweight or light heavyweight champion of the world, you fight every weekend. When you're the heavyweight champion of the world, you fight once a year. And Harry Greb beat the snot out of Gene Tunney the first time, and then Gene Tunney came back and won the second one. But Harry Greb sparred with Dempsey, and Dempsey said of sparring with Harry Greb, there's 2 weight classes difference when there were only 8 weight classes. He said it's like being in a glove factory and all the shelves are falling on you. Like Harry Greb was just constant activity, punching. And a brilliant character too. Like Cus D'Amato, Mike Tyson's coach, he said the reason that he couldn't go professional when his brothers did was that he had bad vision, and the doctors were very strict on it at that time because they just found out Harry Greb fought half his career with a glass eye. And I just think that's so awesome. And he used to turn up at restaurants where he knew the newspaper men were eating with like 2 hookers and be very obviously drunk the night before a fight, and then the odds would be against him. He'd move the odds as these people called on their friends, and then he'd come in and just whoop the shit out of the guy having bet his purse on himself. But anyway, we were raving about Harry Greb. That being said, Gene Tunney does rave about Harry Greb in his book. I would not say it's worth $400. You aren't going to learn very much from it. It's just an interesting insight into the guy's life. €400, sorry. However much that is in dollars. I have things like this because I'm a collector, and that's the thing that I enjoy collecting. But I don't think I would ever pay €400 or pounds or dollars or whatever for a book. I think the most I've paid is when I was feeling particularly flush, and I found a very rare copy of Masayama's Advanced Karate, and that cost me handsomely. But otherwise, like, I would not bother. You aren't going to get any knowledge out of a book that I mean, you will, things that people say will change how you view things, and that's always interesting, but you aren't going to learn any secret technique or secret training method out of an old book. It's not going to be life-changing in that regard. In terms of favourite fighters who haven't won belts, I think, like, once you follow this sport for any length of time, you realise that the number of people who do win belts is vanishingly slim. You know, someone was asking me about a gay UFC champion the other day in the men's divisions, and I said that I knew of a couple who are widely believed to have been gay, and then I realised that there's only been about 40, so I was like, oh, can't out anyone. But, you know, there's loads of guys, like KJ Noons is the one I always have a good laugh about, because KJ Noons, when he was on, and when he was young, was very, very promising. If you watch him box up Nick Diaz the first time, and then just smash Eve Edwards, very impressive. Never really, like, reached his potential. But Michael Johnson's another one. I've always... Michael Johnson is the guy who inspired the Filthy Casuals guides, because I said I'm going to do some kind of video on just a guy and how his interesting style makes him very tricky for you know, he's a real minimalist. He does low kicks, straight punches, movement. And that is enough to really trouble guys like Tony fucking Ferguson and Edson Barbosa. You know, you just fiddle with the sliders, you know, work out how much of each you need to apply, and you can make that very simplistic game work for any number of different fighters. Though, you know, he has been on a real drop-off in recent years. And I think a lot of that is that almost everything you see of Michael Johnson is him in gym wars on Instagram. And you're like, why are you trading bombs with Nikki Holskin, who, you know, you have no business doing that with? Why? Why not just use that as a learning experience? I would have said Michael Bisping if he hadn't won a title just before he left, but another great one. I used to like Alan Belcher a lot. I thought he was very interesting. You know, there's going to be so many now, because it's rather than everything coming together towards one style, which is what we're kind of worried about in MMA. Things seem to be getting more and more varied. I mean, everyone learns to like wall wrestle and shit now, but everything in between, it's almost like up for grabs what you do with it. So, you know, you're going to have all these interesting guys like Zaleski, you know, really weird fighting style. Liang, you know, you could pick 5 guys from a division and they'd all be just completely different. And odds say that none of them are winning a title, to be honest. But I think, you know, I moan a lot about the state of the cards that they're booking and things like that. But it's not because I'm just like, put more title fights on this card. It's because there are a lot of guys I'm interested in this sport, you know. You know, if you follow this for any length of time, you start to realize, damn, he's got a really interesting style. Maybe it's not beating George St. Pierre, but it's certainly very, very interesting, and I would love to watch him fight again. And there are so many of those guys in the UFC. They've got a roster of about 500, 600 fighters. Anytime like 150, 200 of those, I'm quite passionate about watching, happy to watch, you know. And when they're not appearing on cards, you go like, okay, well, this does feel phoned in. Bit on the spot with this question. I should have like read this before the show and compiled the list, but I feel like every week I'm raving about someone who's probably never going to win a title. So there's a lot of them out there. Ross Pearson, fuck it, Ross Pearson, he's my number one. Never won a title. Someone was saying to me the other day, we all know that Ross Pearson would have boxed up BJ Penn, and I think they were joking. But then I was like, because, you know, a lot of BJ's thing was his boxing, and Pearson was very, very slick. Very, very slick on the feet. And the things that shut him down are normally kicks, and BJ didn't throw those. I mean, there's the world-class grappling and top game and passing and wrestling to deal with, but it's a hypothetical. Fuck it, I'm going to say he won. Right, I reckon that'll do us for today. I will be back on Monday with the podcast. I'm trying to release this Garbrandt Cruz study over the weekend. I've got way too into watching Dominic Cruz. He does this thing which I'm just calling the launch pad, but it's a little bounce that he does backwards onto almost a southpaw stance, but feet almost level. And then he can do hitting from both stances in both directions, moving around the opponent from there. And I've just gone down a rabbit hole drawing all these fucking diagrams and stuff. When really I'm supposed to be talking about how awesome Cody Garbrandt was in that fight. But if you want to get that and read all the other stuff that I put out for the Patreon boys, sign up to the Patreon, support the podcast, be a dude. If you want to watch... Oh, and also watch the Filthy Casuals guides, because I did 2 very recently, and I did say I'm only going to do them for big fights or pay-per-views, because it eats into podcast time, and I should be doing more podcasting. If you want to send an email to the podcast, fightsgonbypodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I've written this week or at any time, head to fightprimer.com. You can work your way through to my Unibet piece on Israel Adesanya versus Yoel Romero from there. I'm your boy Jack Slack. KJ Noons' unfulfilled potential bless.